Morning, everyone. You good? Excellent. For those of you who don't know me, hi, my name's Paul. I'm on team here, Garden City, and it is lovely to see all your smiley faces this morning. More smiley faces, I think, required. No, that's it. So we're in now, I think, week 4 now of our series on the book of Jonah. And if you've not been with us, or if you have been with us and you've forgotten everything that's happened before, let me just catch you up. So in chapter 1, Jonah gets a very clear call from God. And God says, go to Nineveh. And Jonah responds immediately, just not in the direction that God had in mind. God says Nineveh, and Jonah heads in the exact opposite direction. And we have a map. Oh, there you go. It's up there already. And as you can see, Nineveh is one way and Jonah goes the other way to Tarshish. So he's not slightly off course. He's not a bit unsure. As I've said before, this is impressive levels of commitment in going in completely the wrong direction. Then the storm hits. And this isn't just random or bad luck, but God interrupting where Jonah is heading. The sailors are panicking. Jonah ends up overboard, and then we get the bit that everyone remembers, the fish. And I still find it funny how the Bible just casually handles that moment. The Lord provided a big fish. That's it. No explanation, no detail, no attempt to help us understand how that actually works. There's just a fish. And if you're anything like me, you've got questions. What kind of fish is it? How is he breathing in there? How is he not just fish food? The Bible just doesn't go there. It's Bible almost saying that's not the point. But at the same time, it is hard to ignore. Because however you picture it, it's not exactly a pleasant situation. And although it is rescue and not punishment, it really must have felt like punishment. 3 days inside a fish. I mean, the smell alone, can you imagine? It's not something you'd forget quickly. And Jonah is not coming out of that experience thinking, that was refreshing. Then in chapter 2, Jonah prays. And just as abruptly as the fish appeared, Jonah is out again. The Bible says the fish vomited Jonah onto dry land. Let your imagination run with that. And here's an image that, if I'm honest, I spent way too much time with AI generating, but worth it, really worth it. And that's where we pick up the story today. So if you've got a Bible with you, we're in Jonah chapter 3, and we'll also have it up on the screen. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you. Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now, Nineveh was a very large city. It took 3 days to go through it. Jonah began by going a day's journey into the city, proclaiming, 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. The Ninevites believed God as a fast was proclaimed, and all of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. When Jonah's warning reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, took off his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. This is the proclamation he issued to Nineveh. By the decree of the king and his nobles, do not let people or animals, herds or flocks taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink. But let people and animals be covered in sackcloth. That's just an image, isn't it? Trying to get sackcloth over your animals. But anyway, let everyone call urgently on God. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence. Who knows? God may yet relent and with compassion turn from his fierce anger, so that we will not perish. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. So there's a lot going on in that passage. But rather than try and take it all at once, I just want to pull out a number of points. And the first one is this: God does not give up on you. And you see it right from the start. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Just that phrase, a second time. Because Jonah has already had this conversation once. God spoke, Jonah heard, Jonah went the other way. Very deliberately. And yet here we are again. God speaks again. And what stands out is this: God doesn't go looking for someone else. He doesn't think, right, let's try someone a little bit more reliable this time. He doesn't change the plan. He goes back to Jonah and speaks again. And this is where I think it starts to connect to us, because I think we're often tempted to move on when things don't work out the first time. We try something else, or we quietly assume, well, that opportunity, it's gone. And we can do the same with God. You can probably think of moments, something you felt prompted to do, a conversation you felt you should have, a step you knew you were meant to take, and you didn't. You hesitated. You avoided it. You went the other way. And over time, it's very easy to settle into the conclusion of, I missed it. That was my moment. But Jonah 3 tells a very different story. Because nothing in Jonah's story so far suggests that he's now the obvious choice. If anything, he's proven the opposite. And yet God comes back to him and speaks again. And as Tim Keller has often said, God keeps reaching out to us and working in us, even when we are running from him. And that's what you're seeing here. Not a new plan, not a different person, the same call coming again. We think our inconsistency means we've missed it, but God doesn't step back from what he has called us into. I kind of think this is a little bit like parenting, because if you've ever told your child to do something and they don't do it, you don't go, right, that's it, I'll get another child. You might be tempted to, but that's not how it works. You don't replace the child, you repeat the instruction. Maybe a bit more clearly, maybe a bit more firmly, but the relationship hasn't changed and the intention hasn't changed. You still want them to do what you've asked. And in a very simple way, that's what we see happening here. God doesn't replace Jonah. He returns to him, speaks again, the same person, the same call. And that matters, because this isn't just Jonah's story. This starts to touch on our own lives today. Where might God already have spoken to you? And where might you have stepped away from that? And the follow-up question is probably the important one. What if he hasn't moved on? What if the invitation is still there? Not because you've earned another chance, but because that is what God is like. He speaks again. He invites again. He calls again. And some of you, that might be the thing you need to hear this morning. The realization that God hasn't given up on you. That it's not over. That he still speaks. That he still has a purpose for you. And he still invites you into what he is doing. So just pause on that for a moment. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. And ask yourself, where might that be true for me as well? And that leads us on to the second point. Your obedience does not need to be perfect. Because if you keep reading, what's actually quite surprising is how this unfolds. Jonah goes, he obeys, but there's nothing in the text that suggests it's some kind of polished, passionate, charismatic delivery. In fact, his message is about as simple as it gets. 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. That's it. No build-up, no explanation, no attempt to soften it. It's short, it's blunt. It's not exactly what you'd call compelling communication. And yet, as we follow the story, despite the poor performance, the outcome is extraordinary, which tells us and tells you something really important. The outcome is not dependent on how well Jonah performs. And this is where I think we often get stuck, because we tell ourselves, I need to be better at this. I need to say it more clearly. I need to feel more confident. And until then, we hold back. But this passage says something different, because God works through Jonah, not because Jonah gets it right, but because Jonah shows up. And this is where I was thinking about something from a couple of weeks ago. I was away in Bologna, Italy, if you didn't know where that was. And I do not speak Italian at all. But I tried. Ordering food, asking for things, attempting conversations. And most of the time, it was not great. Half sentences, wrong words, probably saying things in completely the wrong way, and let's not even touch on the accent. And yet, it worked. Not because I suddenly became fluent, but because the person I was speaking to would meet me halfway. They'd switch into English. They'd fill in the gaps. They'd figure out what I meant. And somehow between my poor attempt and their understanding, we got what was needed. And it's a bit like that here. Jonah turns up, says what he's been given to say, not perfectly, not impressively, but he shows up. And God does the rest. And as N.T. Wright often points out, the story of Scripture is that God is at work in the world, and he chooses to work through ordinary people. And that's what you're seeing here. God is already at work. Jonah is simply a part of it. And I think we often get those the wrong way round. We think it depends on me getting this right. But in reality, God is already at work, and we are invited to join in, which means the pressure lifts. It shifts. It's not about perfection. It's about participation. Not about getting everything right, but about being willing, showing up, taking a step, saying the thing, even if it feels simple, even if it feels a bit clumsy, because God is more than capable of closing the gap. And for a lot of us, that's the barrier. Not calling, but hesitation. Holding back because we do not feel ready. Because we think it depends on us and our abilities. And this point removes that excuse. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing. And that leads me into the third point, which is no one is beyond God's reach. Because as you keep reading, the story becomes, I think, surprising. Jonah goes into Nineveh, delivers his message, and then something completely unexpected happens. The Ninevites believe God. Not gradually, not partially, but immediately. And not just a few people. Everyone, from the greatest to the least. Even the king responds. He gets up from his throne, takes off his robes, and sits in the dust, and calls the whole city to turn. It's a complete reversal. And you have to remember who these people are. This is not a neutral city. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire, known for violence, known for cruelty, an empire that dominated others through fear. This is not the kind of place you expect a spiritual awakening. If anyone was beyond reach, it would have been them. And yet they are the ones who responded most fully, which says something, I think, quite uncomfortable. Sometimes the people we are most likely to write off are the very people God is already at work in. And I think we still do this. We draw quiet lines, not out loud, but internally. This person wouldn't be interested. That situation won't change. They're too far gone. And if we're honest, we don't just do it in general terms. We do it very specifically. People we work with, people in our families, people maybe we've had a difficult history with, maybe people who see the world very differently to us. We make a call, sometimes quite quickly, where we say they're not open, they wouldn't respond, they're just who they are. And once we've made that call, we stopped expecting anything to change. And without realizing it, we limit our expectation of what God might do. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Certainly it does to me. Only one? Okay, great. Carry on. But this story disrupts that because Jonah walks into a place he assumes is closed and he finds it wide open. Now, confession time. I love musicals. And one of my favorites by far is Les Miserables. Now, this is probably one of the few things, if maybe the only thing, I fall out with Sam on because she hates Les Mis, which, I mean, she's just wrong. And it's fine. It's fine. Friends can disagree, but I'm right. Anyway, back to Les Mis. You've got Jean Valjean and you've got Inspector Javert. And Javert is absolutely convinced he knows who Valjean is. In his mind, it's simple. He's a criminal. He's dangerous. He will not change. That's the category as far as Javert is concerned. And everything that Valjean does gets interpreted through that lens. Until there's this moment where Valjean shows him mercy. And suddenly, it doesn't fit. Because Javert is faced with something he didn't expect. Something that doesn't line up with the story he's been telling himself. And he can't process it. His categories have just collapsed. Because the person he had written off turns out to be something very different. And that's what this feels like. Except here, it's not just one person. It's a whole city. Nineveh is the place Jonah assumes is beyond reach. A place that should be entirely closed to the warning he is bringing. And yet it's the place where everything opens up. As Miroslav Volf, a theologian who's written a lot about grace and reconciliation, puts it, God's grace is scandalous because it refuses to stay within the boundaries we set. And that's exactly what's happening here. Jonah has boundaries, clear ones. Who deserves mercy? Who doesn't? where God should work, where he shouldn't. And God just steps right over those boundaries. He's already at work in Nineveh before Jonah even arrives, which means when Jonah turns up, he's not starting something, he's joining something. And that's easy to say, but it's quite different to live like that, because it means God may already be at work in conversations you've written off, in people you've stopped engaging with, in situations that look completely unchanged. Not always visibly, not always obviously, but quietly under the surface in ways you might not immediately see. And we can miss it because we're looking for obvious signs, or we've already decided what the outcome will be. But this story suggests something different, that God is often at work in places we least expect, and in people we've already made our minds up about. And that's exactly what's happening here. The place Jonah has already written off is the place God is already at work. And that changes, I think, how we see people. Because instead of asking, will God do something here? The better question becomes, what might God already be doing that I just haven't seen yet? Because the people Jonah least expects to respond are the ones who respond most fully. And that is still true. So what does that mean for us? Who have you already decided is not interested? Who have you quietly written off? Where have you assumed nothing is going to change? And what if God is already at work there and you just haven't seen it? That leads us into the fourth and final point. God's heart is mercy. Because after everything we've just seen, this is where the story brings us. Jonah delivers the warning, the people respond, and then we read this. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. God sees not just what they say, but what they do. He sees the turning. He sees the shift. He sees the change in direction. And then he responds. The outcome changes. And that tells you something I think really important. Judgment is the warning, but mercy is the desire. God is not looking for an opportunity to judge. He's looking for a reason to show compassion. The warning is real, the consequences are real, but they are not his end goal. They are there to bring people to a place of turning. Because when people turn, God responds. Not reluctantly, not slowly, not after a long process, not with hesitation, but immediately. As J.I. Packer puts it, God is more ready to forgive than we are to repent. Think about that. God is more ready to forgive than we are to repent. Which is another way of saying God is not the one holding back. We are. He is not reluctant. He is not resistant. He is not waiting to be convinced. He is already inclined towards mercy. And I think this is where we often get God wrong, because we assume he relates to us the way we relate to each other. We keep score. We remember. We replay things. If you're anything like me, again and again and again. We weigh up what feels fair. We think in terms of, how serious is this? Have they done enough? Is it too late for them to turn? And without realizing it, we project that onto God. We assume he is cautious, measured, holding back. But this passage shows us something very different. God is ready to forgive, ready to restore, ready to show mercy. And there are moments in history where you get a glimpse of something like this. After apartheid in South Africa, the country had to decide what to do with the years of violence, injustice, and harm. The expectation was trials, punishment, retribution. I mean, that's what justice normally looks like, right? And that's what most people assumed would happen. But instead, they set up what became known as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by Desmond Tutu. And the approach was very different. People who had committed serious wrongdoing were invited to come forward, to tell the truth, fully, publicly, not to minimize it, not to excuse it, but to bring it out into the open, to bring it into the light. And in many cases, if that confession was genuine and complete, they were granted amnesty. No prison, no prosecution. And for many people, that was incredibly difficult to accept because it just didn't feel like justice. It felt too generous, too costly, too unfair. People struggled with it because it challenged something, I think, deep within us, our instinct for balance, for repayment, for things to even out. And yet, the aim was very different. It was about breaking the cycle of violence, about choosing a future that wasn't just shaped by punishment. And even that example is only a glimpse, because even at its best, human mercy is careful, measured, often debated, sometimes resisted, sometimes partial. But God's mercy is not like that. There is no negotiation here in Jonah, no process, no delay, no hesitation. They turn and he relents immediately, completely. Not because the situation wasn't serious, but because his heart is mercy, because this is who he is. And that means something for us, because I think many of us don't actually struggle with knowing when we've got something wrong. We know that's not the issue. The issue is what we think will happen next. Because if we're honest, we often assume God keeps score, that he's tracking it, weighing it up, holding it against us. And so even when we know we need to turn, we hesitate, we delay, we soften it. We keep a bit of a distance, not because we don't want to turn, but because we're not sure how he will respond. But Jonah 3, I think, gives us a very clear picture. When people turn, God responds with mercy. He does not keep score. He does not hold back. He is not reluctant. And if that is true, it changes how we approach him. But it also changes how we treat others. Because we tend to treat people the way we think God treats us. If we think God keeps score, we keep score. We remember what people have done. We hold on to it. We make them earn their way back. We decide when enough is enough. But if God's heart is mercy, then we're invited into something different. To be people who don't keep score, who don't hold things over others, who don't decide in advance how someone should be treated, because we've seen what God is like, and we've experienced that ourselves. So maybe the question isn't just, what do you expect from God? But also, what are you holding on to? Where are you still keeping score? Where have you decided someone doesn't get another chance? because the same mercy we see in God is the mercy that we are invited to reflect. So, as we come in to a close, we've seen today that God does not give up on people, that your obedience does not have to be perfect, that no one is beyond his reach, and that God's heart is mercy. And I think the invitation this morning is actually very simple. For some of us, maybe you felt disqualified or hesitant because you feel like you won't get this right. You'll fail again. And so you've been holding back, keeping your distance. But God does not give up on people. And he does not wait for perfect performance before he works through them. And for others, maybe there are people you've quietly written off, people you've assumed are closed to God. And maybe the invitation this morning is to simply leave room again for what God might do. To recognize that he may already be at work in places you hadn't expected, because no one is beyond his reach. And after all, God's heart is mercy. So if you're able to, please stand.